As dawn breaks, George sits grumbling in his kitchen, sipping his coffee. The world, as seen through George's eyes, is often a source of irritation, and today is no exception. His next-door neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, a tall man with a booming voice and a knack for perfection, is hammering away at his backyard fence, creating quite a commotion. George mutters under his breath about the noise, his brow furrowed in annoyance. Meanwhile, Susan, George's bright-eyed granddaughter, watches her grandfather, her curiosity piqued. She suggests, in her youthful innocence, that George should voice his frustrations to Mr. Jenkins. George dismisses her suggestion initially, grumbling about the futility of it all, but her words stir something within him. With a sigh, he sets down his coffee, his decision made. George heads out of the house and directly toward the fence. George clears his throat loudly, catching Mr. Jenkins's attention. Standing at the fence that divided their yards, George was a stark contrast to the tall, hammer-wielding Mr. Jenkins. But the grumpy old man was not to be underestimated. "Jenkins," George began, his voice gruff, "your noisy fence work is driving me up the wall. It's impossible to enjoy a quiet cup of coffee with all that racket." He crossed his arms over his chest, a clear signal that he expected the noise to cease. Mr. Jenkins paused, turning to face George with a smug grin. "Oh, George," he chuckled, "you're always grumbling about something, but I suppose I can be a good neighbor and lower the volume a bit." The way he said "good neighbor" held a hint of mockery, but George chose to ignore it. George, surprised by the response, nodded gruffly. "Well, good. You'd think after all these years you'd have a little consideration for your neighbors." Just as George was about to turn away, Mr. Jenkins called out again. "By the way, George," he began, "I noticed your rosebush needs some attention. I'd be happy to help you trim it if you'd like." This offer left George even more taken aback. He eyed Mr. Jenkins suspiciously for a moment, then replied, "Well, that's a kind offer. Maybe I'll take you up on it." Walking back to his porch, a hint of a smile flickered across George's face for the first time that morning. Susan was waiting for him, her eyes shining with triumph. "See, Gramps," she said, "it's not so bad to talk to your neighbors. You might even make a friend out of it." George just grumbled in response, but the faint smile remained. It seemed that even the grumpiest of old men could learn a thing or two about community and understanding. It was a lesson that George, and perhaps all of us, could stand to remember. Back in the kitchen, Susan is beaming at her grandfather. Her face glowed with the satisfaction of a lesson well learned. "See, Gramps," she says, her voice humming with excitement, "it's not so bad to talk to your neighbors. You might even make a friend out of it." George grumbles, his signature retort, but this time there's a slight curve to his lips, a subtle admission of defeat. He's learned something today, something that his granddaughter, in her youthful wisdom, has keenly pointed out. "Maybe you're right," he admits, his voice gruff. "Maybe it wasn't such a bad idea to talk to Jenkins after all." It's a small concession, but a significant one. George's gruff exterior has always been a shield, a barrier between him and the world. But today, he's learned that the world isn't always against him, that sometimes all it takes is a little communication to turn a grating noise into a harmonious melody. It's a lesson that resonates, a reminder that even the most hardened hearts can soften, that even the most stubborn minds can change. It's a testament to the power of dialogue, the strength of community, and the importance of understanding. "Who knows," he continues, "maybe Jenkins isn't such a bad neighbor after all." It's a revelation, a seismic shift in George's worldview. It's a step towards acceptance, towards tolerance, towards friendship. It's a stride towards a more harmonious neighborhood, a more peaceful existence. So, as George sits back on his porch, his grumbling subsiding into a quiet contemplation, we are reminded of the power of communication, the importance of community, and the transformative effect of empathy. It's a lesson that transcends the boundaries of age, a lesson that even the grumpiest of old men can learn. Even the grumpiest of old men can learn new tricks, as we've seen in today's episode of Grumpy George's Chronicles. And as we close this chapter, we are left with a profound message, a heartening reminder that it's never too late to change, to grow, to learn.